Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, thank you for joining. Do you have a question or a comment?
I have a couple of comments and I guess a couple of questions. Um, I wanted to kind of just add to the conversation that isn't comedy or what's funny kind of like beauty? It's in the eye of the beholder. Not everyone is going to find something funny. So not every joke is going to be funny. You're not going to like every comedian. That's just not the way it works. So can you even really critique something if you in general don't like that type of comedy or that comedian? Can you really critique it fairly?
Is that to a specific person or?
Um, Not really, but I would love to hear Aaron's opinion.
Aaron's like,
Um,
okay.
sure. So I feel like we're on a loop, and this is what is a struggle for me, right? I come in here and I say, look, there's a subjective conversation to be had about whether this thing is funny or not. And there's a separate conversation to be had about whether this thing is transphobic, which I think is more of an objective conversation than whether or not the thing is funny, right? We can have a whole debate about whether comedy is subjective or objective. I think we would actually all agree that, like, there are certain
It's
things that just
comedy.
are
You
not
can't
funny.
leave that part out. You can't just
Well,
talk
well, so
about whether it's transphobic.
Well, so that's the problem. That's the
Um,
loop, right? So I say it's transphobic, right? And somebody responds, it's comedy. And I say, well, I think it's transphobic because it's bad comedy. And I state reasons why I think it's bad comedy and why it fails to avoid being transphobic. And then they say, well, that's subjective. And I say, well, I think it's not subjective because of these specific claims that are being made about why it is transphobic that have nothing to do with whether or not it is good or bad comedy, in my opinion. But the problem is they do in a sense, because if he made the jokes better, right, then they wouldn't be transphobic because they would be aimed in the right ways and are doing the right kinds of things. I just want to add Angel's comment about the truth versus laughter thing. Chappelle doesn't end the show on a laugh line. He ends the show on a truth line. He ends the show on a, here's my opinion. Here's my conclosing claim. I want you to stop punching down at my people. So if he's making an argument, and I think he is, then we have to assess that and not just the has he been funny or not question. And I think it's fair to assess and say his comedy has not succeeded at making the argument that it was trying to make, separate from whether or not it was funny.
I totally
Well,
agree with that. I
but
totally
that's
agree with
my
that.
point, right?
That's totally fair.
Are you even qualified to like judge that? That's my point. It's not really going in
I think
circles. I'm
everyone
I'm
is. I
asking
think,
what
everyone.
makes you qualified to judge that.
yeah, I think the minute
Uh,
it's out and everyone can watch it, everyone gets to say whatever they want to say about it, as loud as they want to say it, and as wrong as
Yeah,
they are, right
but
as they are, or as technical as they want to get.
being free to comment doesn't make you qualified though.
It doesn't
but
matter
what
if
would?
I'm qualified.
Go ahead.
Like, my qualifications don't matter. What matters is I will make specific claims about where I think he does something wrong, and you can assess those claims on their own merits. And you can either
I didn't
say
ask
I don't.
if you I didn't ask that. I asked what would make you qualified, not whether it matters if you're
Well,
qualified
I
or
mean,
not.
what would make
Oh,
anyone qualified?
Yeah.
yeah,
What
knowledge
do
of
you
Well,
what do,
I
what do
culture.
would
you
say
mean
that
makes somebody
people
qualified?
I would say that people that have been long-term fans of Dave Chappelle
So
can better
Aaron's
And I'm
critique his
qualified.
qualified.
career
I'm eminently
and his
qualified.
jokes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so Aaron is
100%
I mean, that's
qualified.
that's pretty
qualified.
much all of us, I think. Yeah.
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 Right. I asked him what makes him qualified. I don't know why he's being offended. I'm
Oh,
No,
asking
no,
him
no,
a
that's
it's
question
I'm just
so that
trying to
I can
explain.
understand where
Yeah,
he's
I think I'm
where he
qualified
stands.
because I
I
think I'm
don't think he's
qualified
being
because I've
offended.
loved Dave Chappelle's comedy from the beginning, and I've loved
yeah.
transgressive comedy since I was very young, and like I've spent a lot of time thinking about ethical and less ethical comedy, and so I mean, but I think a lot of everyone here is qualified to make their own assessments. I don't think I have special expertise on this front.
So
Yeah.
do people generally like I don't know. I don't come to comedy for ethics per se, but or at least not enough to really, I guess, speak in the way you just did of coming to it from an ethics point of view. I kind of just come to comedy to enjoy the comedy, and I enjoy all different types of comedy, all different kind of people, you know. Um, but I feel like if you come to comedy to laugh versus if you come to comedy to critique it, you're viewing it through a different lens. And that kind of goes back to what you all were talking about earlier when you were saying that, you know, being this kind of person doesn't really matter as far as the lens that you come to the table with. Because I think someone had mentioned that a Black person might see this comedy differently than a white person. I think it was Dr. Lunsford, sorry. And I think you disagreed. Why? I don't understand that. I think everyone's history, their socio patterns, and like all of that, like it brings all of them, all of these people together, but it can also separate them, right? So you and I are different for whatever reason. Wouldn't that make us see a specific comedy different?
Was that a question? Were you still
I
asking
think
me?
that's why conversation is so important, because of that, because we're going to see it differently. I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Everyone's going to come in with their different lens. I don't think it's wrong to, like Aaron was saying, I think it's totally fair, because Dave didn't just make jokes, he made statements. And you can decide to look at the special and say, I'm going to assess the accuracy or the efficacy or the usefulness of his statements. You can do that. That's totally fair, because he's making them. And once the product is out for us to see, we have a right to judge it and interpret it, and it becomes ours, you know, in an important way. So yeah, I mean, I think it's totally fair to critique it that way. And I certainly, I don't join Aaron's critics in saying, you know, in dismissing his concerns or his critiques as he just doesn't get it or anything like that.
Why? But I don't know. I just think if it's quite possible to not get something. And I think
Sure,
Aaron's
yeah.
point was, no, that's
Sure.
not. And I disagree with him on that.
No, I'm
would
sorry, that
like
wasn't
for
my
him
point.
to kind of elaborate more.
Yeah, let me clarify. I can absolutely not get things, and I'm sure there is at least one joke in that bit that I probably didn't get, and probably because I'm not sufficiently steeped in Black culture, as Dr. Lunsford was suggesting. I think that's true. I just think that's a totally separate question from, you know, half of this special was him making a moral argument about where you should be punching online, and you know, especially where the LGBTQ community should be punching. And as like an ethicist, I think I'm well positioned to critique that part of it, separate from, like, you know, the questions about did I get all of the jokes. I mean, I think I got most of the jokes. I think I found a few of them a little bit funny, and again, I think they weren't his best stuff, but that's not the problem. And if all he had done is like gone on and done a weak set and like hadn't made the additional claims that I'm concerned about, then like I wouldn't care. Like it'd be like, he missed one. Everybody misses, you know, like that's even the great misses.
And Aaron, I think that's my confusion. What are the additional claims that you're saying that he made?
Claim like essentially the insinuation that the way that his friend was treated online by the LGBT community was part of that person committing suicide, and that was used as a kind of justification for his claim that that community needs to stop punching down at his tribe. So I think that argument it wasn't supported, and it involves a kind of binary that I think ultimately doesn't hold up. So those are the sorts of things that I think we can talk about, where it's not a question of was he funny or not. It's a question of, you know, did he make those points? Did he back those points up effectively?
Well, and he did the argument tactic where right before he finished that and tossed the microphone, I believe he said, "Now I don't know or don't know whether or not this is the reason that it happened," but it was very much in the energy level of, "But I believe."
Well, but it didn't help. He said it definitely.
That's what I read.
Didn't
That's
help.
was the word. It definitely didn't help. Right.
Yeah.
That was the language that he very deliberately chose to utilize in that moment.
So
and there is an interesting wrinkle to this, if I may. There's an interesting wrinkle to this, which is, and I didn't know this until after, until like a couple of days ago. But some screenshots started coming up of after Daphne Dorman committed suicide. Twitter was a rage in blaming Dave Chappelle for it. So that to me speaks to another issue of like, we all need to not take these kind of, I mean, so I don't know. It's intense and
that's
it's
tough.
terrible.
Can I
That's
ask
you
a
know.
That's
question
like,
to Aaron? Are you saying that in the LGBT community that there's no issue amongst just that community and how we can attack each other? Because I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. I
No,
would
absolutely not. I'm not
completely
saying that.
disagree that any attacks from within the community itself towards anyone in the community couldn't play a part in if they killed themselves, and trying to remove them from responsibility completely is just not fair.
So let me be clear. I absolutely think that there is various tensions within the LGBTQ community, and that's why, again, I liked the car bit in Sticks and Stones, because it very accurately conveyed several of those tensions. The way that bi people are excluded, for example, comes up there, and I think was well argued. And I don't know why this person killed themselves, and Dave Chappelle doesn't either. And neither of us should be insinuating anything about why this person chose to do what they did, much less use it as an argument in a special against an entire community, which is what it feels like I think he did here. All of us, I
So
think,
why is the
will.
entire community allowed to blame him?
I don't think that they are, and I don't think it's good that, like, if he was dragged on Twitter for this, I absolutely am not defending that either. But like, that's not a good reason for him to turn around and do what he did here. And like, a lot of this special feels to me like Dave Chappelle is struggling with the realities of fame, which has always been a part of his struggle with his career, in the sense that, like, there were three different stories of people harassing him who recognized him, and like how annoyed he was by that. And like, but at the same time, he said it at one point in the special, Twitter is not real life, in a dismissive kind of way that seems totally incongruous with him later claiming that Twitter was part of his friend's death in this way. So like, I think he's just not being consistent about even his own claims about where harm can come from.
and I guess
Well,
to
real
clarify
life is like,
that
go ahead.
Twitter's not a real place.
Say that again,
Right,
Dr.
and he didn't
Lunsford?
explain at all what that meant. He said Twitter's not a real place. He did not elaborate, but then he later, in effect, blames Twitter for killing his friend. It seems like a very real place to me in that sense, and I think
It
it's important.
has real life consequences.
Yeah, exactly. I
But
think
people
it's not
go
a real
there
place.
and they
It has real life
act out
consequences.
in ways that they wouldn't do in public.
Yeah, but I
So
do
that's
think
what
Aaron
makes
has
it
a
this.
point. I do think Aaron has a point though, because the dismissive comment of Twitter is not real life, and which is
Not a
very
real place.
heavily, well, it's not a real place, but yes, of course it's not a real place. Like, but I don't think he means that literally, because that would just be a vacuous statement, right? I think parenthetically what's going on is it's not a place that is effectual for me. It's not a place that matters. I don't care because it's not real, right? But of course it's real, because real people are using it, real people are communicating on it, and those communications spill out into the real world, as he points out later on. I mean, I don't think that he, I certainly didn't get the impression that he implied that, that Daphne's dragging on Twitter for defending him was responsible. I kind of took him at his word when he said, I don't know what was going on in her life. He also mentioned that,
But
but
it didn't
he
help.
said it didn't help, right? And I can go with that. Of course it wouldn't help. That must be awful, right? Because Twitter is not fake. Twitter is a real thing, and it has real effects. It has consequences, so it matters. So I do agree with Aaron there that there is a contradiction in what he's saying. And I think it's kind of a throwaway comment of like, fuck that. But it's not really fuck that. Of course I care. That's why I'm talking about it. So
My question is even though he said the words, it's not a real place, is the way he responded to the white lady in effect acknowledging how real it is for him that it's one of those things where you're saying I don't know if there's an actual linguistic term for that I don't know, where you say a thing, but in actuality what you're saying, the words are the opposite meaning of it as it relates to the internal struggle that you're having. I felt like I felt that in the Twitter comment, that was the referential callback to the Twitter at the end, is that we can put our chainmail on and say that Twitter doesn't affect us, but at the end of the day, that white lady coming to me talking about what got said on Twitter does in fact affect me as much as it's not a real place. And as you said, it probably didn't help that whatever was happening in Daphne's life on top of those things was potentially going on your phone, and this not real place having real life consequence.
And I actually think those two concepts aren't really even in conflict. Actually, I was agreeing with everything you were saying, Angel, about sort of the dichotomy of what it means for Twitter to be a real place or not a real place. And I think there's a separation between saying that Twitter has, like Press Play was saying, Twitter has real life consequences versus Twitter is not representative of the world, which I think that's all he meant by Twitter is not a real place. So I think those two concepts aren't antithetical at all.
I think I agree. I want to just point out, though, Twitter is not representative statistically, right? But Twitter is what is most often pointed to when cancel culture comes up and people are trying to say, here's where cancel culture is happening, right? And again, maybe that goes back to the consequences stuff as well. I'm very adverse to the idea of dividing these places in this kind of way. Lots of communities aren't demographically representational, but they still have a significant impact on the people in them and the way that they see the world and such like that. So I guess it does feel like a bit of a vacuous throwaway line that then undercuts what he might have been making a point later.
I think sometimes we can get so into the weeds, like that every single word is then analyzed and like, what did he mean that? But he said this, but he should have said that. And so and we miss that a lot of stuff is allegory. Like you mentioned, Aaron, he mentions his 3 different people coming to them. You know that those aren't actual real stories. He uses this allegory to explain larger things, which is like in that instance, he's saying, keep it in the comments, bitch. Like, don't come to me in real life and threaten me with harm. But like, actually, like, this is how I want to engage with my fans. My issue with you, I guess, with critiques like yours is that I hear it's like kind of like going through something, like looking for the fine print, like trying to find the like, well, this is the wrong and this is the wrong. But like when you speak directly to the claims that he makes, but when he makes this powerful, definite claim of like, I am doing this for my people. There's anti-Blackness that are in these movements. People are deliberately not trying to hear me. And I want to be heard on these issues. I can hear people talk for 2 hours all and around this and never mentioning those truths, never mentioning like, there's a point in that, or this is that. It's always like, what you're saying is good, but because you have said it like this, because you have said it like that. And there have been numerous times where I've heard the words right should have been said right or wrong or correct or success. And I think
can I jump in right here?
Labels
press
put on to
Sam, man.
I'm going to wrap up, Sammy. You got it. Those are different labels that people put on and project that aren't necessarily ascribed by everyone else. So I think that's a white supremacist mindset that tells us to look for things that are correct, that are right, that are, this justified thing. When in reality, what's right, what's correct may or may not be your subjective opinion in that point. And you can go ahead, Sam.